Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Nymphadora Tonks only appeared in the Harry Potter story in the 5th book, but she quickly won the hearts of fans. Her character was bright and unforgettable. The ability to change her appearance at will, her funny personality, her fearlessness, and her skill made her one of the readers' favorites. She also appeared in the films, but as so often happens, viewers missed many fascinating details that were revealed only in the books. Today I'll tell you about the facts that never made it to the big screen. Enjoy the video. Number 1. She, not Luna, saved Harry on the train. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry decided to follow Draco Malfoy under the invisibility cloak. The plan seemed good, but he was spotted. Malfoy immobilized Harry and broke his nose. In the film, Luna Lovegood rescued him, but in the book it was Tonks who found Harry, fixed his nose, and sent him back to Hogwarts. Number 2. She tricked the Dursleys. After the Dementor attack, Harry was left alone at home. The films showed how the Order of the Phoenix came to fetch him, but they left out a fun detail. It was Tonks who got the Dursleys out of the way. She sent them a letter claiming they had made it to the finals of the best-kept lawn in England contest. Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley hurried off to check the results, and in the meantime, Harry was whisked away to the Order's headquarters. Number 3. Her mentor was Alastair Moody. Becoming an auror required passing brutal tests. Tonks admitted that she almost failed her exam in stealth and tracking, but her mentor turned out to be none other than Alastair Mad-Eye Moody, one of the greatest dark wizard hunters. Despite his paranoia, he was an excellent teacher. Tonks's skills shone through again and again throughout the series. Number 4. She wasn't a prefect. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry took the news hard that Ron and Hermione were chosen as prefects instead of him. This moment was cut from the films, but in the book it was Tonks who helped Harry accept it. She confessed that she hadn't been made a prefect either because of her reckless and unpredictable character. She even added that both his father and Sirius had never been prefects. Those words truly comforted Harry. Number 5. She guarded the prophecy. In the Order of the Phoenix movie, we see Arthur Weasley guarding the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries, where Nagini attacked him. But the books clarify many Order members, including Tonks, were assigned to guard it. Had the snake attacked on a different night, she might have been the one in danger. She also visited Arthur at St. Mungo's with the others, a storyline completely cut from the films. Number 6. Remus nearly left her. After the events of the 6th book, Tonks and Lupin secretly married. She was happy, but Remus soon doubted his choice. He even came to Harry with the idea of abandoning his wife and joining the Golden Trio on their journey. Harry sharply called him out, saying James Potter would never have done such a thing. Those words hit home. Remus stayed by Tonks's side. Number 7. She became a mother, and this was one of the most important events of her life. Tonks and Remus had a son, Teddy, who is barely mentioned in the films. At a gathering at Bill and Fleur's house, they asked Harry to be the boy's godfather. The chosen one accepted the role nervously but proudly, feeling what a great honor it was. Number 8. Her Patronus changed because of love. Tonks's Patronus is one of the most powerful symbols of her love story. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry sees it for the first time and mistakes it for a wolf. Rowling writes, "A large four-legged creature ran across the road and vanished." "That was Tonks," said Lupin quietly. "Her Patronus has changed lately." The meaning is clear. Her feelings for Remus Lupin had transformed even her deepest magic. Patronuses are born from emotion, and Tonks's heart reshaped hers into a reflection of the man she loved. The books never reveal what her Patronus was before, and that mystery makes the change even more striking. Some fans speculate it might have been something playful to match her humor, perhaps a dog or a rabbit, but the truth is left untold, emphasizing instead the raw power of her love. By becoming wolf-shaped, her Patronus tied her to Remus forever, It was not just protection against Dementors, but a declaration of devotion, written in silver light. Number 9, she was a proud Hufflepuff. Tonks was a true Hufflepuff, sorted there when she first arrived at Hogwarts. Under the guidance of Professor Pomona Sprout, she grew into the kind of witch who valued loyalty and courage over ambition or cunning. Though the films never mention it, the books make it clear. She was proud of her house. In Order of the Phoenix, when she speaks to Harry about not being chosen as a prefect, she casually admits, "Never got made a prefect myself. I lacked certain necessary qualities, like the ability to behave myself." It is classic Hufflepuff honesty wrapped in humour. Her traits shine brightest in her loyalty. Tonks joins the Order of the Phoenix not for glory but out of a deep sense of duty. Hufflepuffs are known for standing by their friends, and Tonks does exactly that, rushing into battle after battle even when the odds are overwhelming. In the Department of Mysteries, she fights beside Kingsley and Sirius, refusing to retreat until she is injured. That kind of persistence, fighting until she falls, is the Hufflepuff spirit made real. The irony is that many readers and viewers overlook her house because the films erase it. Yet the choice of Hufflepuff matters. It ties her to figures like Cedric Diggory, who embodied fairness and bravery, and to Newt Scamander, who fought darkness in his own way. Tonks's humour, clumsiness, and bursts of wild pink hair may have made her seem less serious, but beneath it all was the quiet strength of a Hufflepuff, steady and unshakable. Number 10. Family ties with the Malfoys and Lestrange. Tonks's family ties are a web of contradictions. Her mother, Andromeda Black, was disowned for marrying Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born, yet Andromeda's sisters went down very different paths. Narcissa married Lucius Malfoy, securing her place in the pure-blood aristocracy, while Bellatrix became Voldemort's most devoted lieutenant. That makes Draco Malfoy Tonks's cousin, and Bellatrix her aunt. The irony is sharp. While Draco is raised to despise blood traitors, his own cousin is an auror fighting against everything the Malfoys stand for. The books highlight these strained connections in subtle ways. At Sirius Black's house, the family tapestry shows Andromeda's name burned out, her face gone. Sirius tells Harry bitterly, "My dear sweet mother blasted you off the family tree the moment you married a Muggle." Tonks jokes about it, but the truth is grim. She grew up knowing her own relatives would rather erase her than accept her. It sets the stage for the eventual clash with Bellatrix at Hogwarts, when bloodlines meant nothing compared to loyalty. Tonks's link to the Malfoys and Lestranges deepens the tragedy of her death. She does not just fall in battle, she falls to the hand of Bellatrix, her own aunt. The family feud becomes literal, the blood of the same house spilled on opposite sides of the war. It is one of Rowling's recurring themes. Family can bind, but it can also divide. In Tonks, readers see the cost of choosing love and justice over the poisonous pride of pure blood supremacy. Number 11, she was a natural Metamorphmagus. Tonks was not like Animagi, who had to train for years to master a single form. She was born different, a Metamorphmagus, able to change her face and body at will. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry watches in surprise as she makes her nose swell into a pig's snout and then shrink back to normal. "Metamorphmagus," she said, looking pleased at Harry's astonishment. "Born one." It is one of the rarest magical gifts in the wizarding world. For Tonks, the power was more than a trick. In everyday life, she turned it into comedy. She gave herself bubblegum pink hair, squared jawlines, or an old lady's wrinkles, just to make others laugh. Her playfulness often broke tension in the gloomy headquarters of Grimmauld Place. Even Sirius cracked a smile when she transformed her nose into a duck's bill. It was Tonks's way of bringing light to dark rooms. As an auror, the gift became a weapon. The Ministry trained its agents to track and deceive, but Tonks already had an advantage. She could alter her appearance instantly, blending into a crowd or throwing off an enemy. Moody admired her talent, though he scolded her clumsiness. The truth was clear. No other auror could slip into disguise as naturally as Tonks could. Her magic made her the perfect spy. Her legacy lived on through Teddy Lupin. In the epilogue of Deathly Hallows, Harry sees Teddy changing his hair colour as easily as breathing, a mirror of his mother's gift. Tonks had fallen in battle, but her son carried the same spark of joy. The rare power of the Metamorphmagus was not only inherited, it became a reminder that even in loss, her spirit continued to flicker, bright and unbroken. Number 12. She fell in the Battle of Hogwarts. Tonks's last stand comes in the Battle of Hogwarts, and it is one of the most heartbreaking parts of Deathly Hallows. She has just become a mother, yet she makes the impossible choice to leave her infant son with Andromeda. Rowling writes, Tonks had rushed into the castle to find her husband, showing how love and duty collided in that final night. For Tonks, the war could not be fought from the sidelines. Her death is cruel. In its intimacy, she falls at the hand of her own aunt, Bellatrix Lestrange. The family bond makes the duel more tragic. Bellatrix, who had already murdered Sirius, now strikes down another relative on the opposite side of the war. The text spares no sympathy for Bellatrix. It simply notes, Tonks was lying across him, motionless, her eyes staring. It is one of the starkest images in the Great Hall after the battle. At the same time, Remus Lupin dies nearby, killed by Antonin Dolohov. Husband and wife, fighters for the same cause, fall within moments of each other. When Harry sees their bodies, the narration lingers on the cruel irony. Remus and Tonks, pale and still, apparently asleep beneath the dark, enchanted ceiling. They look peaceful, but the cost is unbearable. Teddy is now an orphan, echoing Harry's own childhood. Tonks's decision to return to the fight, even as a new mother, defines her character more than any joke or clumsy moment ever could. She knew the risk and still chose to stand beside her husband and her friends. It shows her bravery was not just inborn skill or a flash of pink hair, but a deliberate act of sacrifice. Her legacy continues in Teddy and in the memory of a woman who refused to hide when her world was burning. Number 13. 7 Potters, her duel in the sky. The night of the 7 Potters was one of the most dangerous moments in the entire war. Harry's friends and allies disguised themselves with Polyjuice Potion, each becoming a copy of him, while pairs of riders took to the skies. Tonks flew with Ron Weasley on a broomstick, racing through the dark air as Death Eaters swarmed them. She was not just part of the plan, she was on the front line, where the risk of death was real and immediate. It was her own aunt, Bellatrix Lestrange, who spotted her. In Deathly Hallows, the book describes the sudden clash as Bellatrix bore down on Tonks, hurling curses with her trademark fury. Bellatrix chased me halfway to Tunbridge, Tonks later told the others at the Burrow, her voice still carrying the edge of the fight. The family connection made the duel all the more vicious. Niece against aunt, both determined, neither willing to yield. Tonks nearly lost her life in that chase. The battle in the skies claimed Mad-Eye Moody, and every rider faced death. Yet Tonks, young as she was compared to Moody or Kingsley, managed to survive. She fought Bellatrix off long enough to reach safety with Ron. Her resilience in that moment proved she was no comic sidekick, no background figure. She was a fighter with the nerve and skill to face one of Voldemort's most dangerous lieutenants and live. In the films, this part of the story is barely shown. The chaos of the chase is there, but Tonks's duel with Bellatrix is not. On the page, though, it is a striking image. A bright-haired auror clashing with the infamous Death Eater in midair, broomsticks cutting through the night. It is one of those details that remind us Tonks was never content to stay in the background. She was always willing to risk everything, even her life, for the people she loved. Number 14. She hated the name Nymphadora. From the very first moment she is introduced, Tonks makes it clear that she hates her full name. When Harry meets her in Order of the Phoenix, she interrupts Moody's roll call with a groan. "Don't call me Nymphadora," she snaps, pulling a face. She insists everyone use simply Tonks. It is a small detail, but it captures her personality perfectly. She is rebellious, playful, and refuses to be boxed in by the old traditions of her pure-blood family. The name itself carries the weight of her heritage. Nymphadora was chosen by her mother, Andromeda Black, who had grown up in a house obsessed with noble-sounding titles. But Tonks wanted nothing to do with that. She was a half-blood auror, proud of it, and she preferred a short, sharp name that sounded like hers alone. In many ways, her rejection of Nymphadora was also a rejection of the pure-blood world she was born into. Only one person was ever allowed to soften her rule. Remus Lupin, quiet and gentle, sometimes called her Dora. Instead of bristling, she accepted it. In Half-Blood Prince, when Lupin's doubts made him push her away, Tonks's pale hair and subdued spirit reflected her heartbreak. Yet when he returned to her, she accepted his voice, his Dora, without complaint. It showed the rare place he held in her heart. The small rebellion against her name is more than comic relief. It reveals Tonks as a woman determined to define herself on her own terms, yet willing to yield in love. Her defiance toward Moody, Kingsley, or anyone else who dared say Nymphadora contrasted with the quiet tenderness she shared with Remus. For readers, that sharp dislike became a symbol of her strength, and her acceptance of Dora became a sign of her deepest vulnerability. Number 15. Injury in the Department of Mysteries. Here's the full 1,300-word article in 15 long paragraphs, as you requested. Nymphadora Tonks has often been remembered for her bright hair, clumsy accidents, and cheerful manner that made her one of the most charming secondary characters in the Harry Potter saga. Yet, hidden beneath the humor and playful Metamorphmagus tricks was a witch who carried scars that readers rarely stop to consider. One of the least discussed yet telling moments of her arc occurs during the battle inside the Department of Mysteries, where she was gravely injured in a confrontation with Death Eaters. The detail, brief in the text, reveals a sobering truth about Tonks. Behind the jokes and the bubblegum pink hair was someone who paid the same price as soldiers in a war, a young woman whose resilience was tested by wounds that took her out of the fight long before her comrades fell. The chaos in the Department of Mysteries was described by Rowling with cinematic urgency, as Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, Luna, and Ginny were ambushed in the Hall of Prophecy. Death Eaters closed in, and it was Tonks, along with members of the Order of the Phoenix, who arrived in time to defend the students. In the struggle that followed, curses flew faster than readers could count, and it was here that Tonks, who had seemed almost indestructible in earlier appearances, suffered the kind of injury that stripped away the illusion of invulnerability. Rowling writes in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Harry saw Tonks fall, and she did not get up again. That simple line, stark and final, carries a weight far greater than its brevity. It signals a moment when the laughter that Tonks embodied was silenced by the cruel reality of combat. The Ministry battle is often remembered for the death of Sirius Black, yet Tonks's fall is a smaller tragedy within the larger catastrophe. While Sirius's loss became the story's emotional climax, Tonks's incapacitation added another layer to the theme of sacrifice. She was young, barely older than the students she was fighting for, and until that moment she had seemed like a beacon of energy. Readers had seen her knocking over umbrella stands, changing her nose to amuse Harry, and lightening the grim atmosphere of Grim Old Place. But war did not respect jokes, and when she crumpled under the weight of an enemy's curse, her role shifted from comic relief to casualty. The contrast is powerful because it shatters the notion that optimism could shield one from harm. The injury itself was never fully described, which makes it more haunting. Unlike the detailed accounts of Harry's scars or Ron's broken bones, Tonks's wound remained vague, forcing readers to imagine its severity. She was rendered unconscious, unable to rise, and this suggested something deeper than a simple knockback spell. In the next book, it is noted that she needed a long period to recover, a subtle but telling indication that her time in the Department of Mysteries left a lasting mark. The absence of detail is not a narrative oversight. It emphasizes the randomness of battle injuries, how suddenly vitality can collapse, and how silence sometimes speaks louder than description. When Tonks reappears in Half-Blood Prince, her condition is cloaked in hints rather than revelations. At first, Harry notices her hair has lost its vibrant colors, settling instead into a mousy brown. While much of this change is attributed to her emotional turmoil over Remus Lupin, the lingering shadow of her injury is undeniable. Rowling shows that Tonks is not the same witch readers met at Grimmauld Place. She carries exhaustion, perhaps pain, and certainly the invisible trauma of a fighter who has been close to death. This transformation ties back to the battle where she fell, reminding readers that the joyful Metamorphmagus paid a price for standing in the path of Voldemort's forces. The Order of the Phoenix itself is a tapestry of sacrifice, with members like Mad-Eye Moody losing limbs and eyes in service of their cause. Tonks's wound situates her within that lineage, reminding readers that she, too, was more than the clumsy young recruit. She was a warrior who faced Bellatrix Lestrange and Lucius Malfoy in the very heart of the Ministry. That she did not fall permanently speaks to resilience, but the fact that she was forced out of the fight so early emphasizes that courage does not guarantee survival. In war, even the most capable can be struck down by a curse they never see coming. What makes Tonks's injury especially poignant is its timing. She collapsed before Sirius's death, before Dumbledore arrived to take control of the battlefield. She was removed from the climax, and so her suffering fades into the background of the narrative. Yet if one pauses, this omission mirrors the reality of war. Countless individuals are wounded out of sight, while history records only the grand finales. The spotlight may not linger on Tonks in that chapter, but the line, "Tonks had fallen and did not move," is enough to ensure that attentive readers recognize her silence as another form of loss. Tonks's recovery period stretched across months, and this is significant because it reminds us that magical healing was not always instantaneous. Even in a world with spell work like Episcean potions brewed to mend bones overnight, some curses left scars that time alone could soften. Rowling subtly underlines that point by not restoring Tonks to her full vibrancy at the start of the following book. She walks through Half-Blood Prince with her brightness dimmed, hair subdued, energy muted. It is only later, when her relationship with Lupin begins to stabilize, that her light flickers back. Readers see then that both physical wounds and emotional ones are intertwined in shaping her arc. Number 16, her family defied the pureblood cult. Nymphadora Tonks, with her ever-changing hair and clumsy charm, might seem at first like one of the lighter characters in the dark and heavy story of Harry Potter. Yet behind her humor and warmth lies a deeply personal defiance that often goes unnoticed. Her very existence was a challenge to one of the most powerful and toxic beliefs of the wizarding world, the so-called purity of blood. This rebellion did not begin with Tonks herself, but with her mother, Andromeda Black, whose choice to marry the Muggle-born Ted Tonks forever changed the path of their family. To understand Nymphadora's identity, one must begin with the walls of 12 Grimmauld Place and the infamous black family tree that tried, but failed, to erase her mother's name. Andromeda Black was one of the 3 daughters of Cygnus and Druella Black, born into a dynasty obsessed with bloodline and status. Her sisters, Narcissa and Bellatrix, followed the script written for them. Narcissa married into the wealthy Malfoy family, while Bellatrix pledged herself to Voldemort, embodying the Black family's darkest ambitions. But Andromeda broke the pattern. She fell in love with Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born wizard who lacked the centuries of pedigree her family valued above all. Her marriage to him was seen not as a union, but as a betrayal. The Black family's tapestry, described in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, shows the brutal consequence. Sirius's voice rang out, bitter and hard. Andromeda's been blasted off after she married a Muggle-born Ted Tonks. In that burned hole lies the story of Tonks's origins, born into love, but also into defiance. The Black family's ideology was not unique, but it was influential. Walburga Black, Sirius's mother, had turned Grimmauld Place into a shrine to blood purity, with her portrait shrieking endlessly about filth and traitors. It was this very atmosphere that forced Sirius to run away from home and later caused Andromeda to be cut off completely. Tonks grew up not in the cold corridors of a house obsessed with lineage, but in a household where love was more important than ancestry. Ted Tonks, though absent from the family tapestry, left an indelible mark on his daughter's outlook. While she inherited her mother's black bloodline, she inherited none of the prejudice. This made Tonks a living contradiction to the Black family's proud legacy, a child they pretended did not exist. When Tonks entered the wizarding world as an adult, her career choice was far more than a matter of personal ambition. She chose to become an auror, one of the most dangerous professions in magical Britain, not simply to chase criminals, but to actively defend society from the very ideology her family once championed. Mad-Eye Moody, who trained her, remarked on her clumsiness, but also recognized her fierce determination. Tonks was not motivated by prestige. Unlike many of her black relatives who thrived on status, she was motivated by justice. The Auror's office, under Kingsley Shacklebolt and others, became her way of ensuring that people like her father would never be treated as less than human because of their blood. This decision carried a symbolic weight. A daughter of the Black family standing at the front lines against Voldemort, whose ideology of blood purity echoed her own relatives' beliefs. Tonks's rebellious lineage is mirrored in her cousin Sirius Black, who also rejected his family's creed. In Order of the Phoenix, Sirius explains bitterly to Harry, "My mother blasted me off the family tree when I was 16. I ran away." The parallels between Sirius and Tonks are striking. Both were children of the Black family who chose a different path. Both were cut off from their roots and both bore the scars of estrangement. Yet while Sirius carried a bitterness that weighed heavily on him, Tonks embodied resilience. She managed to balance the pain of rejection with a lightness that allowed her to laugh, love, and even stumble with grace. Her bright hair and eccentric personality were not merely quirks, but acts of freedom, the opposite of the rigid control the Black family imposed on its members. The decision of Andromeda to marry Ted Tonks meant that Nymphadora grew up in a family that valued acceptance rather than hierarchy. Andromeda, though estranged from her sisters, gave her daughter a foundation of strength. It is easy to forget how radical this choice was in the climate of the time. The Blacks were not just another old wizarding family, they were power brokers, connected to the Malfoys, Lestranges, and Rosiers. To walk away from that world was to forfeit influence, wealth, and protection. Yet Andromeda did so without regret, and that courage bled into Tonks's own choices. When she later married Remus Lupin, a man scorned by society for being a werewolf, she repeated her mother's rebellion in her own way, prioritizing love over prejudice. One of the most striking elements of Tonks's character is her unyielding loyalty. When Voldemort returned and blood purity rhetoric swept through the wizarding world again, she did not hesitate to join the Order of the Phoenix. Her role in guarding Harry during the escape from Privet Drive or standing watch at Hogwarts showed her resolve. But more than her actions, it was her willingness to put her life on the line that demonstrated the depth of her defiance. The Blacks once prided themselves on being toujours pur, always pure, but Tonks's life shouted the opposite. Purity was irrelevant. Compared to integrity, her willingness to embrace the rejected, whether Muggle-borns, werewolves, or blood traitors, stood in direct contrast to the values etched into her family's heritage. Number 17, Hair as a Mood Barometer. Of all the characters who pass through the 7 books, Nymphadora Tonks is one of the most visually striking, not because of her robes or her mannerisms, but because of her extraordinary hair. Readers first encounter her in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, and at once J.K. Rowling makes it clear that her Metamorphmagus ability is more than a gimmick. It is a living extension of her heart. Her hair works like a barometer, shifting shades not only when she wants it to, but when her emotions overwhelm her control. This detail, almost cinematic in its execution, gives Tonks a place in the story as one of the most subtly human characters in the wizarding world, a witch whose magic betrays what she cannot always say aloud. The image of her hair is unforgettable: pink spikes, like a rebellious hedgehog, violet curls, flowing and playful, lemon-yellow streaks catching the eye like shafts of sunlight. These transformations carry a kind of joy. They reflect the Tonks readers first meet, the one who clumsily knocks over dishes in the Dursleys' kitchen yet laughs it off, whose vibrant personality erupts through mistakes. In Order of the Phoenix, Rowling writes, "She had a pale, heart-shaped face, dark, twinkling eyes, and short, spiky hair that was a violent shade of violet. The word violent here does not mean cruel, but explosive. Uncontrolled, vibrant, exactly the spirit Tonks embodies when she is first introduced to Harry, but like many things in the wizarding world, brightness has shadows. What begins as a playful trait later becomes a devastating signal of her suffering. When Tonks falls in love with Remus Lupin, the man who believes himself too dangerous, too poor, too unworthy to return her affection, she carries that weight in silence, yet her hair cannot hide it. It turns drab, muddy, drained of vitality. The auror who once lit up a room with pink spikes appears wan and ghost-like. Rowling emphasizes this change in Half-Blood Prince. She had mousy, dull hair and looked thinner and paler than Harry had ever seen her. For a character whose identity has always been inseparable from her ability to reinvent herself, this sudden dimming is more haunting than any scar. Readers can feel the pain of that passage because it is so physical. To lose one's laughter is tragic, but to see someone who could once summon neon shades with a grin now stuck in dull brown, that is heartbreak in colour. It is as though her soul has refused the world's palette. In the gloom of the Hogwarts corridors, where Harry mistakes her shadow for his mother's, the symbolism is so powerful that it requires no explanation. Her silence and her hair speak volumes. The contrast becomes sharper when one remembers her earlier moments. In Grimmauld Place, she makes Harry laugh by turning her nose into a duck's bill. At Christmas, she dyes her hair bubblegum pink and charms everyone at the table. These memories remain vivid because of their brightness. They make her later decline feel crueler, almost like the loss of a star in the night sky. Her hair was never just for show, it was the visual soundtrack to her inner life. Lupin's refusal of her love brings the most dramatic change. He tells her that he is too old, too poor, too dangerous, and unfit for marriage. Tonks fights to stay strong, but her body betrays her. She cannot disguise the grief. Even Professor McGonagall notices it when she sees Tonks after Dumbledore's death, remarking on her condition with a tone of both concern and surprise. For readers, this becomes one of Rowling's most understated yet potent depictions of depression. It is not screaming or weeping, but the quiet draining away of colour from someone once radiant. The metaphor becomes all the more cinematic because it is visual. In a film, no words would be necessary. A bright-haired witch, always shifting shades, suddenly walks into the frame with dull brown strands, and the audience instantly knows something is broken. Rowling's genius lies in writing a book that already thinks in images. Tonks's hair is as expressive as an actor's face, carrying mood, tension, and story all at once. When reconciliation finally comes, the colours return. After Lupin accepts that he does love her, after he allows himself to step into the light of happiness, Tonks glows again. In Half-Blood Prince, after their reunion, her hair is no longer a dull brown but bursts once more into daring shades. The relief is not only for Tonks, but for the reader who has suffered through pages of seeing her dimmed. It is like watching a garden bloom after winter. Rowling writes, the change in her hair was the most striking of all. It had regained its usual colour, a shocking pink that could not be ignored. This line restores the Tonks readers first adored, and it does so in a single stroke of colour. One cannot underestimate how rare this device is in the series. Most characters reveal their emotions through words or actions. Harry's fury is explosive, Ron's jealousy is cutting, Hermione's frustration comes out as lectures. Tonks alone carries a visible emotional thermometer, and it is written into her very skin. She becomes, therefore, not only a character but also a visual motif. Her happiness, her grief, her resilience, all are painted on her head like a canvas. This also deepens her role in the overall war narrative. The Second Wizarding War is not only about spells and duels, but about the erosion of personal joy. For Tonks, the war steals her brightness, her aura duties, the pressure of her feelings for Lupin, the losses mounting around her. All of this shows not in her words, but in the dullness of her hair. Readers understand that she is another casualty of Voldemort's reign, even before her literal death in Deathly Hallows. She loses pieces of herself long before she falls at the Battle of Hogwarts. Number 18, harsh aura training, and she passed it. Of all the young witches and wizards of her generation, few embodied the contradiction of playful charm and hardened discipline quite like Nymphadora Tonks. Behind her clumsy gait and mischievous sense of humour stood an auror who had passed one of the most rigorous trials in the magical world. To even be considered for aura training, the Ministry of Magic required at least 5 NEWTs with marks of exceeds expectations or higher. On top of that, candidates had to submit to exhaustive background checks, reputation screenings, and a grueling series of interviews. Tonks, though famous for turning her nose into a duckbill to make others laugh, met every single requirement with a quiet determination that spoke to her hidden steel. The Ministry's standards were not arbitrary. During the dark days of Voldemort's first rise to power, many aurors had been forced into situations that tested their loyalty and resolve. Rufus Scrimgeour, who headed the aura office during Tonks's admission, knew that anyone entering his ranks had to be more than just talented. They had to be incorruptible, fearless, and able to keep their composure under pressure. Scrimgeour himself, described in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince as a lion-like man with a mane of tawny hair, was not easily impressed. Yet he approved Tonks, which speaks volumes about her ability to convince even the most exacting examiner of her worthiness. To prepare for the aura program, Tonks needed more than clever wand work. She had to master defense against the dark arts at an advanced level, excel in potions to handle antidotes and poisons, and demonstrate flawless charms and transfiguration skills. These were not subjects she could coast through with jokes and a wink. They demanded hours of focused study, precision and resilience. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Tonks herself jokes about her clumsiness, saying, "Never been much of a one for the household stuff. I'm all fingers and thumbs." But the irony is clear. While she knocked over teacups in Grimmauld Place, she could still disarm or incapacitate an opponent in the field with expert precision. Her light-hearted exterior masked a discipline that had carried her through some of the most exacting magical training in Britain. Once admitted into the program, Tonks was placed under the mentorship of Alastair Mad Eye Moody, the most paranoid and experienced auror of his era. Moody had seen decades of conflict, losing an eye, a leg, and part of his nose in battles with dark wizards. For a young recruit like Tonks, this meant learning directly from a man who trusted no one, suspected everyone, and drilled vigilance into every waking moment. His mantra of constant vigilance was not merely a slogan, it was a survival tool. For Tonks to gain his approval, she had to not only prove herself skilled, but also adaptable, creative, and unshakably loyal to the cause of protecting the wizarding world. The Auror training program itself was notorious for its brutal assessments. Trainees were required to undergo simulated ambushes, stealth operations, and dueling exercises where failure could mean immediate expulsion from the program. In Order of the Phoenix, Tonks is seen effortlessly changing her appearance, turning her hair bubblegum pink or morphing her nose into ridiculous shapes. This Metamorphmagus ability made her a natural at disguise, but Moody demanded far more than tricks of appearance. He needed her to anticipate attacks, track movements, and defend herself when every spell fired at her was meant to test her limits. The fact that Tonks emerged from this program with her humor intact is a testament to her extraordinary resilience. What is often overlooked is how rare it was for anyone to reach Auror status at such a young age. Kingsley Shacklebolt, another member of the elite Auror ranks, was older and already seasoned when he came into prominence. By contrast, Tonks was barely out of Hogwarts when she began her training. That she could sit at the same table in the Order of the Phoenix, Kingsley, Moody, and Scrimgeour demonstrates the immense respect she earned. Rowling makes a subtle but telling point when Harry first meets her. Tonks is introduced not as a recruit but already as a full-fledged Auror, treated with camaraderie by her older peers. She had already climbed the mountain most witches and wizards would never attempt. The reputation checks were just as severe as the magical requirements. The Ministry investigated family ties, possible sympathies with dark magic, and even social behavior. Here Tonks might have faced a suspicion. As the daughter of Andromeda Black, she came from a family infamous for its tangled alliances with pure-blood supremacists. Her mother had been blasted off the Black family tree for marrying a Muggle-born wizard, Ted Tonks. For the Ministry, this could have raised eyebrows, but Tonks's reputation was flawless. She stood proudly by her heritage of defiance, and her cheerful loyalty to the values of equality and justice would have reassured even the toughest examiners she was not a product of privilege but of conviction. Scrimgeour's approval carried extra weight, as he was known to value pragmatism and toughness above sentiment. In Half-Blood Prince, when Scrimgeour meets Harry, he attempts to use persuasion and authority in equal measure, revealing his calculating nature. For someone like Tonks to pass his scrutiny means she had demonstrated more than talent. She had shown the kind of grit Scrimgeour recognized as indispensable. It is no accident that her skills later proved vital in the protection of Hogwarts and her service within the Order. The demands of Auror training also forced candidates to confront their own weaknesses. Tonks's clumsiness might have been a liability in dueling drills or stealth assignments, but rather than succumb to it, she learned to compensate, using her Metamorphmagus skills to create an edge. She could blend into shadows, assume another identity, or distract with a sudden shift of her features. This creativity allowed her to turn a personal flaw into a strategic strength. The same woman who stumbled over umbrella stands could infiltrate dangerous locations without being recognized, a balance that made her invaluable both to the Ministry and to Dumbledore's Order. Perhaps the clearest demonstration of Tonks's elite preparation comes during the Battle of the Department of Mysteries in Order of the Phoenix. Facing Death Eaters alongside seasoned fighters like Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, she held her own in a chaotic and deadly confrontation. Though she was injured and later had to be carried out, her very presence in such a high-risk mission shows the level of trust placed in her abilities. This was no place for the untested. Moody and Dumbledore would not have risked bringing someone who had not already proven she could fight with the best. Tonks's path also underscores the irony of appearances in the wizarding world. While many remember her for her bright pink hair and comic mishaps, the reality is that she was part of a minuscule percentage of wizards who achieved auror status. In Rowling's world, we hear of very few who even attempt the auror track, let alone succeed. Harry himself, inspired by Tonks and others, briefly aspires to become an auror. McGonagall tells him in Order of the Phoenix, "You'll need top grades for that, you know, and only a handful are chosen." This remark casts Tonks's achievement in even sharper relief. She was one of the chosen few. The mentoring relationship with Moody also shaped Tonks into someone who balanced severity with levity. Where Moody was scarred and distrustful, she was buoyant and warm. Yet she carried his lessons, turning his paranoia into preparedness. In this way, she represented the evolution of the auror ideal. The next generation did not have to be consumed by the scars of war. They could carry the vigilance forward while still embracing joy and humanity. Tonks embodied this balance, showing that the auror's life need not crush the spirit. In the end, Tonks's journey through the auror ranks highlights the depth of her character, often overshadowed by her humor. She was more than comic relief in the grim world of Voldemort's return. She was a member of a rare elite, someone who had stood before Scrimgeour's relentless gaze, endured Moody's punishing mentorship, and passed every test of loyalty and skill. Behind every playful wink was the discipline of a witch who had earned her place among the guardians of the wizarding world. And in this, she reminds us that the brightest colors often come from those who have endured the harshest trials. Number 19, her trademark, Watcher. Of all the colorful figures who stepped into Harry Potter's life during the turbulent years of Voldemort's return, few had the same unique spark as Nymphadora Tonks. She was not the most powerful witch he met, nor the most solemn, but she carried within her a disarming quality that immediately cut through the constant darkness hovering over him. Tonks had a habit of greeting him with the playful, slightly mischievous phrase, "Watcher, Harry!" A simple word, barely more than a quirk, yet it revealed more about her character than perhaps anything else. It was light-hearted in a world growing increasingly grim, a reminder that laughter could be as powerful as spells when it came to banishing fear. The first time readers encounter this expression is in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Harry had just been collected by the advance guard of the Order from Privet Drive, still aching from a summer of isolation, nightmares, and the memory of Cedric Diggory's death. His emotions were raw, and the adults surrounding him spoke in serious tones about safety, wards, and orders. Into this tense environment appeared Tonks, with hair a vivid shade of violet and eyes twinkling mischievously. She leaned in toward Harry, beaming, and greeted him with that bright, "Watcher, Harry!" At once, the entire scene shifted. Instead of feeling like a fugitive surrounded by guardians, Harry felt the warmth of someone who refused to let fear dictate every moment. In Russian translations, this greeting is often rendered as prevetik, a word carrying the same playful tone, cheeky yet affectionate. The translators captured the essence of Tonks' personality perfectly. It was not just a hello, it was a wink in linguistic form, a reminder that even during dangerous times one could smile. What makes this so powerful is how it contrasts with the stiff seriousness of the other Order members. Kingsley Shacklebolt, always calm and grave, Mad Eye Moody, perpetually paranoid, and even Lupin, weary yet kind. In the midst of them all, Tonks shone like a spark of colour on a stormy night. Her manner was never meant to trivialize the seriousness of the fight, but to make the unbearable a little lighter. Consider the psychological weight Harry was carrying at that moment. He had been cut off from the wizarding world for weeks, angry at Dumbledore for ignoring him, and plagued by dreams that dragged him back into the horror of the graveyard. Then suddenly there was Tonks, clumsy yet cheerful, her hair morphing from bubblegum pink to turquoise, and her words cutting through his gloom. It was not strategy or spellcraft that helped Harry feel part of the Order that night. It was the informal warmth of Tonks's greeting. As Rowling wrote, "Watcher Harry said a young woman who had short, spiky hair that was a violent shade of violet. She had a pale, heart-shaped face and a wide, mischievous smile. The choice of adjectives, mischievous, spiky, violent in color, captures her vitality, but the greeting itself becomes her signature. What is remarkable is how consistently this phrase appears at moments when Harry most needs relief. Later in the series, Tonks continues to greet him in the same manner, even as the war intensifies. In Half-Blood Prince, when Harry meets her again, her hair is subdued, her face thinner, weighed down by grief and exhaustion, yet when she musters energy, that familiar watcher surfaces again. It is not merely a word, it is an attempt to reclaim a bit of the light she once brought effortlessly. Readers can feel how deeply Tonks's inner turmoil contrasts with her earlier cheerfulness, which makes the memory of her first greetings even more poignant. The greeting becomes not only a catchphrase, but a symbol of resilience, a stubborn refusal to let despair erase her playful spirit. From a storytelling perspective, this detail works like a leitmotif, a recurring phrase that triggers emotional recognition. Whenever Watcher appears, readers are reminded of who Tonks is at her core, a witch who insists on bringing levity where fear might otherwise dominate. It is subtle character work, yet unforgettable. The fact that fans across the world remember Tonks not only for her bright hair, but also for this one word demonstrates its power. While Moody is remembered for his constant vigilance and Dumbledore for nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak, Tonks is remembered for Watcher. Each phrase encapsulates a personality, and Tonks' phrase is perhaps the most endearing. The choice of such a greeting also reveals her background. Tonks was young, only in her early 20s when she joined the Order, and she carried the casual speech of her generation. While other members used formal language befitting their roles as aurors or seasoned fighters, Tonks chose slang. This aligned her closer to Harry's world, bridging the gap between student and adult. For Harry, constantly caught between youth and responsibility, her casual style was comforting. She was proof that adulthood did not require abandoning playfulness, that one could fight dark wizards and still tease, laugh, and stumble over umbrella stands in Grimmauld Place. There is also a deeper symbolic layer. Language in the Harry Potter series often mirrors power structures. Titles, surnames, and formalities matter greatly: professor, minister, lord. Against this backdrop, Tonks strips away formality with a single cheeky word. She refuses to be boxed in by protocols, even though she is a trained auror. In a sense, her Watcher undermines the rigidity of institutions, echoing her rebellious streak as the daughter of Andromeda Black, who defied her pureblood family to marry a Muggle-born. Her greeting is not just personal style, it is resistance against solemnity and tradition, a verbal rebellion as vibrant as her morphing hair. The importance of this trait becomes even clearer when tragedy strikes. By Deathly Hallows, Tonks is a mother, weary but still carrying sparks of that same personality. When she meets Harry again, she greets him warmly, and the memory of her earlier playful words lingers, even if the tone is now softened by the shadow of war. Readers remember how her presence once lifted Harry's spirits, and that contrast deepens the sorrow of her eventual death in the Battle of Hogwarts. The girl who once burst into Grimmauld Place with a cheeky "Watcher, Harry," falls to the cruelty of war, leaving her young son behind. The greeting thus becomes not just a quirk, but a bittersweet memory of light lost too soon. For fans, the translation of Watcher into prefect is significant. It keeps the playfulness intact, emphasizing that this was not a normal hello. A neutral prefect would have stripped away the character's cheekiness. Instead, the translators chose a diminutive that felt intimate and mischievous, as though Tonks were winking at Harry. This shows how central the phrase was to her identity. Translators treated it as something to preserve carefully. Readers of the Russian edition instantly connect the bright-haired auror with that very word, just as English readers do with the slangy watcher. Specific examples show how this worked within scenes. When Harry first stepped into number 12, Grimmauld Place, his heart pounded with uncertainty. He was surrounded by strangers who were older, authoritative, and intimidating. But Tonks bent down toward him, winked, and tossed out her playful greeting. In that moment, Harry felt less like an outsider and more like a friend. Later, when he sat sullenly at the kitchen table, still processing the order's secrecy, Tonks deliberately knocked over a plate with her elbow, laughed at her own clumsiness, and again softened the atmosphere. These were not accidents of writing. Rowling carefully constructed Tonks's role as someone whose lightness disrupted tension. It is easy to underestimate the narrative importance of such small gestures. In a saga filled with epic duels and sinister plots, a casual greeting might seem trivial. Yet Harry Potter's world is shaped not only by battles, but by the relationships that sustain courage. Without Tonks's humour, the Order's meetings might have felt unbearably oppressive. Without her watcher, Harry might have carried a heavier weight during those early encounters. A single word cannot defeat Voldemort, but it can remind someone why fighting is worthwhile. Tonks embodies that truth, and her greeting symbolizes her refusal to let fear take total control. When compared with other characters' catchphrases, the uniqueness of Tonks' greeting becomes even clearer. Hagrid often greeted Harry with booming warmth. "All right there, Harry." Lupin's voice was gentle, tinged with melancholy. Sirius called him Kiddo with affectionate mischief. But none of these carried the same instantly disarming effect as Tonks's slangy watcher. It was both informal and intimate, signaling camaraderie instead of hierarchy. She was not positioning herself as mentor, protector, or elder, but as a peer, an ally who met Harry on his level. In fan discussions, this greeting has taken on a life of its own. Many recall their first encounter with Tonks by quoting that line. It has been embroidered on fan merchandise, printed on mugs, and drawn into fan art alongside her ever-shifting hair. This demonstrates how deeply the phrase is tied to her character. Without Watcher, Tonks might still be remembered for her Metamorphmagus abilities and her tragic death, but it is this playful word that gives her a human heartbeat, making her not only a fighter, but a friend. Ultimately, Tonks' Watcher, Harry, reveals the truth about her spirit. She was clumsy, she was brave, she was deeply in love with Remus Lupin, and she fought to the end. Yet what fans treasure most is that she chose to live with joy even in the darkest times. Her greeting, light and cheeky, was not a dismissal of danger but a weapon against it, a spell of laughter cast in a single word. For Harry and for readers, it is impossible to forget that the girl with violet hair and the mischievous smile first made herself known with that unforgettable phrase. Number 20, famous clumsiness and the umbrella stand. Nymphadora Tonks remains one of the most memorable members of the Order of the Phoenix, not only because of her vibrant hair, her youthful enthusiasm, and her formidable skills as an auror, but also because of her legendary clumsiness. In a world where magic often compensates for human imperfection, Tonks's constant accidents stand out with almost comical brilliance. She manages to be both a highly trained fighter against the dark arts and, at the same time, someone who cannot walk through a corridor without knocking over priceless heirlooms. This duality makes her one of the most human characters in J.K. Rowling's saga. Perhaps nowhere is this more clearly captured than in her recurring battle with the infamous umbrella stand of number 12, Grimmauld Place. The umbrella stand itself is not just furniture, it is an artifact of the Black family's Gothic household. It is described in the 5th book, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, as a massive, serpentine object made from the leg of a troll, grotesque and unwieldy. It is stationed in the dark hallway where every creaking floorboard and clanking chain echoes like a drumbeat through the silence. For the members of the Order, it is an annoyance. For Tonks, it becomes a nemesis. She collides with it so often that it might as well have been bewitched to seek her out. Rowling uses this recurring gag with surgical precision. In Chapter 4 of Order of the Phoenix, when Harry first enters Grimmauld Place, Tonks barrels into the stand and crashes it loudly to the floor. The text captures it with perfect timing. Tonks hurried forward and tripped over an umbrella stand, sending it crashing to the floor with a bang like a cannon. The consequence is immediate. Walburga Black's portrait awakens in a screaming frenzy, unleashing a torrent of fury and insults that requires half the Order to silence her. What makes the scene resonate is not just the noise, but the contrast. Tonks, who just a moment earlier had transformed her nose into the shape of a pig to amuse Harry, suddenly causes chaos on a massive scale with nothing more than her feet. Tonks's clumsiness is never portrayed as a flaw that diminishes her worth. Instead, it enriches her character with dimension. She is capable of serious combat and displays courage equal to that of her more experienced colleagues, yet she constantly provides accidental comic relief. The Order of the Phoenix is an organization that carries unbearable weight: the looming presence of Voldemort, the fear of spies, the deaths of allies. Tonks, with her missteps and crashes, injects an almost necessary levity. Her accidents, though disruptive, soften the tension for both the characters and the readers. The humor of these moments lies in their predictability. Whenever Tonks appears in Grimmauld Place, readers almost anticipate the clang of metal or the shatter of glass. Rowling plays with that expectation. The umbrella stand in particular becomes a symbol of this rhythm, a cue for readers to brace themselves. In many ways, it acts like a stage prop in a play, reminding us that even in dark times, laughter has a place. And it is no coincidence that the object Tonks most often collides with is rooted in the legacy of the Black family, an emblem of their pride and grotesque tastes. Each time Tonks knocks it down, it is as though she symbolically disrupts the oppressive traditions of the house she herself is related to through her mother, Andromeda. Beyond the hallway fiascos, Tonks's nickname among fans, the master of tripping at the worst possible moment, fits neatly with her role in the larger story. During battles, she proves herself agile, brave, and capable of facing Death Eaters. However, in everyday life, her clumsiness reminds us that bravery does not equal perfection. Rowling makes sure we never forget that these heroes, even those trained as aurors, have quirks and weaknesses that make them endearing. Tonks, unlike Mad-Eye Moody or Kingsley Shacklebolt, is not untouchably polished. She is flawed in the most human way possible. There is another memorable passage later in the 5th book when Tonks once again collides with the stand. It reads, "Tonks tripped over the troll's leg umbrella stand with a crash that shook the hall." By repeating this gag, Rowling builds Tonks's reputation as a walking disaster. But it is never cruel. The other characters rarely ridicule her harshly. Sirius Black, the current master of the house, even seems amused. Harry, too, never loses patience with her. Instead, her mishaps become part of the strange fabric of daily life in Grimmauld Place, alongside Creature's mutterings and Mrs. Black's howling portrait. In this way, her clumsiness integrates into the environment as naturally as the dark curtains or the serpent-shaped door handles. Tonks's legendary clumsiness also reveals something deeper about her resilience. In spite of her accidents, she never appears ashamed or diminished. She laughs at herself, shrugs it off, and continues with her tasks. This is in direct contrast to the oppressive energy of the Black household, where mistakes are punished and order is everything. Tonks disrupts that order by her very nature. She represents a kind of rebellion, not just against Voldemort, but against the suffocating expectations of pure-blood culture. Her inability to walk through a hallway without a crash almost becomes an act of resistance. Rowling's use of physical comedy for Tonks also highlights a greater theme, the coexistence of tragedy and humour in the wizarding world. The Order of the Phoenix faces death daily. Characters such as Sirius and Lupin live with enormous burdens of loss and guilt, and yet Tonks enters the scene and knocks over the umbrella stand again, and for a moment everyone laughs, even if they are also silencing Walburga's shrieks. And that laughter is crucial. It is the release valve in a story that otherwise risks collapsing under its own darkness. Fans often recall Tonks's clumsiness as much as her dueling abilities. On forums and fan sites, she has been called the auror with 2 left feet and the most dangerous person to fragile furniture. These playful titles reflect how much readers embraced her imperfections. Her fame among fans is not just as a fighter who died tragically in the Battle of Hogwarts, but also as the vibrant young woman who made mistakes, broke objects, and refused to let those things define her. It is important to note that Rowling never allows Tonks's clumsiness to be her only trait. Her metamorphic ability, her loyalty to Lupin, and her bravery in the final battles are all integral parts of her character. But the clumsiness is what grounds her. Without it, she might seem too extraordinary, too distant from the reader's own experience. By making her trip and crash repeatedly, Rowling brings her closer to us, making her someone we might know in our own lives, the friend who always spills a drink, the colleague who drops files, yet remains deeply competent in the ways that matter. The umbrella stand itself has become an almost mythical object among fans, remembered not for its craftsmanship, but for its role in Tonks's legend. It has been joked about in fan fiction, drawn in fan art, and referenced as though it were a recurring character in its own right. Its association with Tonks is so strong that one cannot think of the gloomy hallway of Grimmauld Place without hearing the echo of her tripping into it. In retrospect, Tonks's clumsiness can even be seen as foreshadowing. Life in the Order is filled with unexpected collisions, disasters that come without warning, and noise that awakens old ghosts. Tonks embodies that unpredictability. Her personal chaos mirrors the larger chaos of the Wizarding War, and yet her cheerfulness in the face of it teaches us that stumbling is not the same as failing. She may crash into stands and wake portraits, but when it comes to the true battles, she stands unshaken. What readers take away from these moments is not frustration at Tonks, but affection. In a story dominated by prophecies, curses, and Death Eaters, Tonks provides humanity. She gives us permission to laugh, even in the middle of war. And each crash of the umbrella stand reminds us that perfection is not what makes a hero. Sometimes it is the ability to rise after a stumble, brush off the dust, and keep fighting for what matters most. Number 21. Metamorphmagus does not mean Animagus. Nymphadora Tonks always stood out in the Harry Potter universe, not only for her bright pink hair and clumsy charm, but because she carried within her veins one of the rarest gifts a witch or wizard can possess. She was a Metamorphmagus, a term often confused by casual readers with another kind of transformation magic, Animagus. At first glance, both abilities may seem to overlap since both involve altering form, but they are as different as night and day. Tonks's magic was innate, immediate, and deeply personal, while Animagus' training was painstaking, procedural, and bound by strict limitations. To see Tonks in the books changing her nose into a beak at will or shifting her hair from bubblegum pink to mousy brown in seconds is to witness something no Animagus could ever replicate, for animagi are tethered to a single chosen animal and must endure years of practice to achieve even that narrow transformation. When Harry first encounters Tonks in Order of the Phoenix, her playful demonstration of her abilities sets the stage. Rowling writes, she had a pale heart-shaped face, dark twinkling eyes, and short, spiky hair that was a violent shade of violet. "Watch her, Harry," she said, and as she shook his hand, her hair turned pink. This moment illustrates the essence of Metamorphmagy power. The change is not accompanied by incantations or wand flourishes, and it is not bound to the rules of transfiguration. Instead, Tonks simply wills her body to shift, like an artist shaping clay. By contrast, consider Professor McGonagall's Animagus form. As an Animagus, she could become a tabby cat, but only that cat. There was no palette of colours, no shifting between human traits, no instantaneous alterations in age or facial structure. Her magic, though impressive, was bound to the single channel she had forged through years of disciplined work. The roots of these two magics reveal their difference. Metamorphmagi are born, not made. Tonks inherited this rare talent through blood, a quirk of magical genetics so scarce that even in the wizarding world it provoked fascination. Animagi, however, are shaped by years of research, discipline, and risk. Sirius Black, James Potter, and Peter Pettigrew famously trained themselves during their school years to become Animagi, enduring secret rituals, complicated spells, and a registration process with the Ministry of Magic. Their skill allowed them to become dog, stag, and rat, respectively, but nothing more. Tonks, by contrast, needed no books, no training, no illicit experiments. Her gift was woven into her identity, a flicker of willpower away from expression. This distinction becomes clear when we examine the scope of her powers. Tonks could age herself on command, producing wrinkles to mimic an old woman or smoothing them away to return to youth. She could stretch her nose into absurd lengths, puff her cheeks like balloons, or make her hair the colour of seaweed green when it suited her mood. Rawling's description is vivid. Her hair lengthened into a silvery blonde mane, then shrank back to short and violet again. Each of these changes was temporary, playful, and entirely within the human spectrum. She never sprouted wings or tails. She never turned into a wolf or a bird. This is the boundary line that readers sometimes blur. An Animagus crosses into animal form, inhabiting fur, feathers, or scales, while a Metamorphmagus reshapes the human template endlessly, but never leaves it. It is also worth noting the psychological element. Tonks's appearance often reflected her inner state. When she was cheerful and mischievous, her hair glowed in vibrant shades of pink and purple. When grief overcame her after Sirius Black's death, her hair dulled to a lifeless brown, as if her magic could no longer summon brightness from within. This tie between emotion and metamorphosis is a key feature of her gift. Animagi, by contrast, do not change involuntarily with mood. McGonagall did not become a cat when she was furious, nor did Sirius sprout canine features when he felt protective. Their transformations were deliberate. External acts of magic. Tonks lived with a body constantly echoing her emotions, a canvas in flux, sometimes beyond her conscious control. The danger and discipline of Animagus magic further highlight Tonks's uniqueness. Becoming an Animagus was not just a matter of talent, but of immense risk. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Professor McGonagall warns her students, "You should know this is a highly advanced, dangerous form of transfiguration. Only a handful of witches and wizards are Animagi. The Ministry of Magic keeps tabs on them." The stakes were clear. A misstep could leave a wizard trapped halfway, neither fully human nor fully animal. This peril was why the Marauder's achievement was so astonishing and why Animagus registration was mandatory. Tonks, on the other hand, never faced this threat. Her body flowed like water from one shape to another, without danger of being frozen between forms. Her magic was safer, but it was also less versatile in the sense that it never crossed into the animal kingdom. An important example of this contrast can be found when comparing Tonks with Sirius Black. Sirius, as Padfoot, could evade capture by transforming into a massive black dog. He slipped through crowds unnoticed, prowled the streets of London, and even entered Hogwarts grounds without attracting suspicion. His animal form granted him stealth and protection. Tonks could never have achieved such concealment through her gift. She could disguise herself as another witch, change her facial features enough to pass a checkpoint, or appear older or younger than her years, but she could not vanish into the body of an animal. Her magic was a tool of disguise and expression, not of evasion and infiltration. It was useful for auror work, yes, but it lacked the more radical concealment that Animagi enjoyed. The Ministry's view of both talents also differs. Animagi, as already noted, are strictly catalogued by law. Their forms are recorded, their identities tracked, their abilities monitored. Metamorphmagi, however, stand outside this bureaucratic cage. The gift is too rare, too unpredictable, and too difficult to control from the outside. There is no registration list for those born with it, no standardized training courses, and no punishments for misuse, apart from the ordinary laws of wizarding conduct. Tonks's ability to shift her appearance was accepted as a quirk, sometimes envied, sometimes mocked, but never chained by paperwork. This lack of regulation reveals how little the Ministry understood, or perhaps cared about, Metamorphmagi. They were curiosities rather than potential threats. It is striking to see how Tonks's gift, though playful and light-hearted, had deep limits. She could not imitate other magical abilities, could not suddenly sprout the scar of Harry Potter or the wandless skill of Dumbledore. She could mimic faces, yes, but only in caricature or approximation. Her transformations did not grant her the voice, the memories, or the magic of those she resembled. In Half-Blood Prince, when Tonks appears at Hogwarts, her hair dull and her face weary, it becomes clear that her power is not infinite. It bends to her spirit, fails. When her heart falters and remains bound within the human sphere. She could not, for example, become a centaur or goblin, for those fell outside the reach of her gift. She was, in the truest sense, human remade again and again, but always human. Her role as an auror demonstrates the practical side of this distinction. Constantly engaged in battles against Death Eaters, Tonks could use her ability to conceal herself in crowds, slip past guards, or adopt a face less conspicuous than her usual pink-haired vibrancy. In this way, her gift functioned as a tool of camouflage, much like a spy changing outfits. Yet in combat, her power offered no edge beyond deception. An Animagus could fight with animal instincts, claws, or speed, but Tonks's transformations remained cosmetic. Her duels were fought wand to wand, her victories determined not by her shifting features but by her courage and skill as a witch. Tonks's family background also plays a role in understanding the significance of her talent. She was the daughter of Andromeda Black, a member of the infamous Black family, and Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born wizard. The Blacks prided themselves on their pure-blood heritage, but Tonks, half-blood, and gifted with a rare magical trait, symbolized a break from their tradition. Her power was not inherited from dark arts or rigid training, but from a quirk of nature, unpredictable and uncontrollable. This set her apart from her relatives like Bellatrix Lestrange, who pursued power through cruelty and spells. Tonks's gift was light, humorous, even clumsy, yet it spoke to the diversity of magical expression in the wizarding world. A curious moment in Order of the Phoenix emphasizes how other characters perceived her gift. Harry, watching her switch her nose into a pig snout, marvels at the ease with which she entertains. It is an ability that provokes laughter more often than fear. Compare this to Peter Pettigrew's rat form, which saved his life, allowed him to spy, and ultimately contributed to Voldemort's resurrection. The stakes of Animagus transformation were deadly serious. Tonks's magic, though profound, was often seen as a parlor trick, a flash of comedy in grim times. Yet beneath the humor lay the reminder that her gift was not chosen, not earned, and not transferable. It was hers alone, bound to her identity in ways others could never access. Rowling herself underscores the rarity of metamorphmagy. In interviews and supplemental writings, she noted that the gift was born, not learned, a magical mutation that occurs only once in many generations. Tonks embodies this rarity, and her struggles with it, her hair losing color when she was heartbroken over Remus Lupin, show that even rare gifts carry burdens. She was not invincible, not all-powerful, merely blessed with a quirk that set her apart. In contrast, Animagi were more common in legend and lore, their abilities mapped out, their stories told in textbooks. Tonks was something else, unpredictable, fleeting, and deeply personal. Ultimately, the comparison between Metamorphmagi and Animagi reveals a broader truth about magic in the Harry Potter world. Some talents can be studied, regulated, and mastered. Others are sparks of nature, gifts of birth that defy explanation. Tonks's laughter, her pink hair, her clumsy grace, these were the signs of a magic no ministry could register and no professor could teach. And while she never prowled as a wolf or soared as a bird, she carried within her something just as rare, the power to shape herself endlessly, to reflect her heart on her face, and to remind the wizarding world that transformation takes many forms, not all of them bound by rules. Number 22, personal loss. Her father's fate. In the chaos of Voldemort's second rise to power, many of the Order of the Phoenix members carried not only the burden of duty, but also private grief that fueled their defiance. For Nymphadora Tonks, often remembered as cheerful, clumsy, and warm-hearted, the war struck deeply into her family, leaving wounds that were rarely spoken of in the books but were no less real. Her father, Ted Tonks, became one of the many victims of the twisted policies of the Ministry under Death Eater control, hunted down like an animal because of his bloodline. To understand Tonks fully, one must look at how the loss of her father became both a personal tragedy and a powerful force driving her decisions in the final year of the war. Ted Tonks was a Muggle-born wizard, and in Voldemort's New Order, that fact alone marked him for persecution. The register of Muggle-borns, introduced after the Ministry fell under the influence of Pius Thicknesser and the Death Eaters, labelled people like him as impostors in the wizarding world, accusing them of stealing magic they had no right to possess. The policy was brutal. Trials, interrogations, and disappearances became routine. For a man like Ted, married to Andromeda Black, who had already been cast out of her pure-blood family for choosing love over prejudice, there was no safe place left. His very existence stood as a contradiction to everything Voldemort's regime wanted to enforce. When the register was enforced, Ted chose not to submit to the Ministry's interviews and instead went into hiding. This decision sealed his fate. The Ministry branded him a fugitive, and soon Snatchers, bands of mercenaries given authority to hunt down so-called undesirables, began to pursue him. Among them were names like Scabier and Greyback, men whose cruelty was legendary. The mere thought of Ted Tonks, a kind and modest man, being forced into such circumstances reveals the stark cruelty of the regime. His daughter, Nymphadora, an auror sworn to defend the innocent, had to watch from a distance as her own father was reduced to living as a fugitive in his own world. Rowling mentions Ted Tonks's fate only briefly in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, but the detail carries weight. In Chapter 22, The Deathly Hallows, Harry and his companions overhear a group of snatchers bragging about their latest captures. Ted Tonks, the Muggle-born, Dirk Cresswell too, and a goblin or two, Griphook's name's been mentioned. Later, the truth comes out in a painful report from Remus Lupin, who tells Harry that Ted Tonks has been killed on the run. The coldness of the information, no great battle, no last stand, simply caught and executed, makes the loss even more tragic. For Tonks, this was not just the casualty of a faceless war, it was the murder of her father. The psychological toll on Tonks is easy to imagine when one places these events in the timeline of the books. By the time Ted was killed, Tonks had already endured much. Her relationship with Remus Lupin had been strained by his feelings of unworthiness. Her career as an auror was endangered by the new regime, and she was carrying a child into a world falling apart. For many, these burdens would be paralyzing. Yet for Tonks, the grief seemed to crystallize into resolve. She returned to the Order with more determination, often against Lupin's pleas for her to stay safe. This insistence was not simply stubbornness, but the natural response of someone who had lost too much to stand aside. Ted's death was not an isolated cruelty. It was a warning sent to every Muggle-born family. Tonks, however, did not treat it as a sign to retreat, but rather as proof that Voldemort's regime could not be allowed to endure. In this sense, her father's fate became her private rallying cry. While her colleagues like Kingsley Shacklebolt or Mad-Eye Moody fought from professional duty, Tonks fought with the knowledge that her father's blood had been spilled by the very people she opposed. This difference matters because it explains why Tonks, heavily pregnant and against all advice, still appeared at the Battle of Hogwarts. She could not allow herself to be absent when the fight came to its climax. The cruelty of Ted's death also exposed the hypocrisy of the so-called purity laws of Voldemort's followers. Ted had been an unassuming, friendly man, described in Order of the Phoenix as a genial-looking man who was bald on top but had an impressive fringe of hair. He was harmless, devoted to his wife and daughter, and lived without arrogance. That such a man was hunted as a criminal reveals the emptiness of the ideology Voldemort promoted. Tonks, raised in this household, understood more than most the value of kindness over bloodlines. The war that took her father was, for her, not just about political control, but about protecting the dignity of people like Ted, who were targeted simply for existing. In many ways, Ted Tonks' story echoes that of other victims mentioned only briefly in the books, Dirk Cresswell, Gornock the Goblin, or even Charity Burbage. They are not given heroic last words or dramatic duels. Their deaths are mentioned in passing, reminders of the silent cruelty spread across the wizarding world. But for Tonks, one of these names was not a stranger, but her father. The fact that Rowling chose to deliver this information without embellishment makes it sting all the more. It is as if the author wanted readers to feel the randomness and injustice of war, where ordinary lives end without ceremony. Tonks's grief also deepens the tragedy of her own fate. At the Battle of Hogwarts, she fought valiantly alongside her husband, leaving behind their newborn son, Teddy. The circular echo is heartbreaking. She herself became the parent lost to violence, just as her father had been. Her son would grow up with his grandparents Andromeda and the memory of Ted, but without his parents. This chain of loss shows how war devours generations, leaving scars long after battles are finished. For readers, the knowledge of Ted's death adds another layer to the sorrow of Tonks's end. It is important to consider how Ted's murder influenced Remus as well. While Lupin's guilt over his relationship with Tonks is a central thread in Deathly Hallows, Ted's fate could only have reinforced his anxieties. He had married into a family now hunted and broken apart, and the father-in-law who had welcomed him was gone. Lupin's desperate attempts to keep Tonks and their child safe, to the point of considering leaving her, can be read in part as his response to that loss. The war, therefore, did not just kill Ted, it destabilized everyone around him, tightening the emotional tension that defined Tonks's final year. When readers look back at the light-hearted Metamorphmagus who could turn her hair bubblegum pink on a whim, it is easy to forget that Tonks's smile often hid shadows. Her family had already been fractured. Her mother, Andromeda, estranged from the Black Sisters, Bellatrix and Narcissa. Then came her father's murder, and later, her own death. Behind every cheerful scene with Tonks stands the unspoken knowledge that she carried far more pain than she ever let Harry or his friends see. In that sense, Ted Tonks's fate did not just fuel her resistance, it revealed the depth of her strength. The tragedy of Ted Tonks also serves as a narrative reminder that Voldemort's war was never confined to famous names or the great halls of Hogwarts. It reached into kitchens, living rooms and backyards, taking away fathers, mothers and children. Tonks's family embodies this perfectly. Andromeda, the mother left to mourn. Nymphadora, the daughter turned fighter, and Teddy, the child who inherited only absence. Their story, when pieced together, becomes a miniature reflection of the war itself. The fight was never abstract for them. It was a matter of survival and remembrance. Tonks never publicly declared that she was fighting for her father, but actions speak more clearly than words. Her decision to defy Lupin's wishes to leave her child and enter the Battle of Hogwarts can be seen as her final testament to the cause she believed in. The loss of Ted had already shown her what submission to fear looked like: endless hiding, running, and death without dignity. She chose the opposite, to fight openly, to risk everything rather than live in the shadow of loss. This was not recklessness. It was the only way she knew to honor what her father had stood for. Readers may never forget the pain in Andromeda's house when Harry brought the news of Tonks's death, but few paused to remember that the same home had already been struck months earlier by the news of Ted's murder. Andromeda lost her husband and her daughter within 1 year, while raising her grandson alone. This overlooked detail magnifies the cost of Voldemort's tyranny. For Tonks, every spell she cast, every mission she undertook, carried the weight of knowing that her father's life had been cut short simply because of his blood. Thus the hidden fact of Nymphadora Tonks's story is that her courage was inseparable from her loss. Ted Tonks's fate was not just another line in the list of Voldemort's victims, but a turning point in his daughter's heart. It gave her fight a personal urgency, one that outshone even her oath as an auror. She did not only fight as a soldier of the Order, she fought as a grieving daughter, determined that her father's death would not be in vain. Through this lens, Tonks's life and sacrifice at Hogwarts become more than the tragic fall of a young witch. They become the continuation of her father's struggle, the last stand of a family that refused to bow before tyranny. Number 23, A Short Life, A Great Legacy. In the vast saga of Harry Potter, where names like Harry, Hermione, and Dumbledore dominate the collective memory, Nymphadora Tonks often remains in the shadows, remembered vaguely for her pink hair and cheerful clumsiness. Yet her life, as short as it was, deserves more attention. Born in 1973 to Andromeda Black, who had been cast out of her pure-blood family for marrying a Muggle-born wizard, Ted Tonks, she entered the world already carrying the burden of defiance. She grew up knowing that her very existence was an act of rebellion against the dark ideals of the Black family, a legacy that would later shape her courage and resolve. In a wizarding world obsessed with lineage and blood purity, her name was whispered with both scorn and admiration. Few knew that this child would grow into one of the brightest lights of the Order of the Phoenix, only to be extinguished at the tragic age of 25. By the time she appeared in Harry Potter's story, Tonks was already an auror, a feat achieved only through relentless training. Becoming an auror demanded not just academic brilliance, but physical discipline, persistence, and exceptional magical talent. Even the Ministry's own guide described the path as requiring nothing short of outstanding in defense against the dark arts. Tonks managed it despite her notorious clumsiness, which was both her charm and her curse. J.K. Rowling wrote in Order of the Phoenix, Tonks had a pale heart-shaped face, dark twinkling eyes, and short spiky hair that was a violent shade of violet. That image of youthful vibrancy disguised the grueling path she had endured to wear the Auror's badge. She was not simply a bubbly young witch with a knack for changing her appearance, but someone who had faced the dark arts head-on and earned the respect of Mad-Eye Moody himself. Tonks's Metamorphmagus ability was rare and remarkable, a gift inherited from her mother's side. It was more than a trick of vanity, it was a weapon. In the escalating war against Voldemort, the ability to change her features at will gave her an edge over Death Eaters who thrived on intimidation and recognition. Rowling notes in Half-Blood Prince, Tonks's hair was mousy brown and her face rather pale, signaling the toll that grief and love had taken on her spirit, but also showing how her gift mirrored her emotional state. Unlike Polyjuice Potion, which required ingredients and time, her transformations were instant, seamless, and deeply personal. They were not just an extension of her magic, but of her personality. She wore her moods in her hair. Her entrance into the Order of the Phoenix was a turning point, not only for her, but also for Harry. In Order of the Phoenix, her cheerful guidance during the dangerous flight from Privet Drive broke the tension of fear that surrounded Harry's departure. "Don't call me Nymphadora!" she snapped, with a playful spirit that disarmed both Harry and the reader. She brought laughter into grim situations, a rare commodity in a world darkened by Voldemort's return. Her youth and energy made her relatable to Harry. She was closer in age to him than to many of the Order's older, battle-worn members. That closeness gave her role a bittersweet edge. She was a bridge between the older generation of fighters and Harry's peers, a reminder that war consumed the young as much as the old. But Tonks was more than an auror or a fighter. She was a woman who fell deeply in love, and her love story with Remus Lupin remains one of the most poignant threads in the series. Their relationship, often overshadowed by the larger battles, was marked by sacrifice and hesitation. Lupin's self-doubt as a werewolf made him feel unworthy of her affection. He even tried to push her away, telling Harry in Half-Blood Prince she deserves someone young and whole. But Tonks refused to let his scars define his value. She stood against prejudice, even among her allies, and claimed her love with bravery. That defiance was an echo of her mother's rebellion, a refusal to let others dictate the course of her heart. When they finally married, it was not in grandeur or triumph, but in quiet resistance. Their union symbolized hope in a world sinking into despair, the belief that love could be found even in the darkest times. It was a lesson to Harry and his friends that personal happiness was not to be abandoned in the fight against evil. And when she gave birth to their son Teddy in early 1998, her role in the story expanded beyond warrior and wife. She became a mother, but fate, cruel and unrelenting, allowed her only fleeting months of that joy. Teddy Lupin, born with her gift of Metamorphmagus abilities, would never remember his parents, only their legacy. Tonks' final stand came at the Battle of Hogwarts. Her presence there was not mandatory. She could have stayed behind to care for her infant son. Andromeda, her mother, surely would have pleaded for her to stay alive, to protect the baby who had already lost so much. But Tonks chose otherwise. She chose duty. Rowling describes her appearance in Deathly Hallows. Tonks had come running after Lupin, her face pale and determined. That single act, leaving her newborn behind to fight, encapsulated her spirit. Her life had been built on defiance and sacrifice, and she was not going to falter in the final battle. Her death, though abrupt and almost cruelly understated, was heavy with meaning. Alongside Lupin, she fell, another name added to the long list of those who gave their lives for freedom. Rowling did not linger on the details, perhaps to reflect the senselessness of war, but their deaths left a profound silence. Harry later walked past their bodies in the Great Hall, describing them as if they were sleeping. Lupin and Tonks, pale and still, and so recently alive, so recently laughing and talking. Deathly Hallows. That image haunts the reader because it underscores how brutally short her life had been. She was only 25. What makes Tonks' story particularly striking is her proximity to Harry in age. Born just 7 years earlier, she might have been his older sister in another life. Instead, she became a comrade, a mentor, and finally, a martyr. Her youth serves as a reminder that the war against Voldemort was not a battle fought only by seasoned veterans. It demanded the lives of those who had barely begun their adulthood. While Harry was still navigating his teenage years, Tonks had already married, given birth, and given her life. That contrast deepens the sense of loss, highlighting the cruelty of a conflict that devoured futures. Her humor, her clumsiness, her ever-changing hair, these traits made her endearing, but they also masked her steel. Tonks represented resilience, the ability to keep fighting with a smile, to transform grief into defiance. When Sirius died, she withered briefly, her hair dull and her spirit shaken, but she did not collapse. Her presence in the later books shows that even broken hearts can keep fighting. Harry himself noticed the change, remarking in Half-Blood Prince that her Patronus had changed form. That shift revealed her inner battles, the way love and grief reshaped even her magic. The legacy Tonks left behind is embodied in Teddy, but it also lingers in the example she set. Harry's decision to become Teddy's godfather was not just a responsibility. It was an acknowledgement of the bond he had shared with Tonks and Lupin. It was his way of honoring their sacrifice, ensuring that their child would grow up surrounded by love, even in the absence of parents. Teddy's ability to change his hair color, mentioned in Deathly Hallows, was a small but powerful reminder that his mother lived on in him, that her spirit of transformation and joy had not been extinguished. The tragedy of Tonks's life lies not in its brevity alone, but in the sheer weight of what she accomplished within it. In 25 years, she defied her aristocratic family's dark legacy, became an elite auror, joined the most dangerous resistance group of her time, loved fiercely, married against prejudice, brought new life into the world, and fought until her last breath. Her story, often overshadowed by larger narratives, is in truth one of the most complete arcs in the series. She lived without compromise and died without hesitation. For readers who look closely, Tonks is not just a side character, but a symbol of what it means to live bravely and fully, even when time is short. Her pink hair, often remembered as a mark of youthful rebellion, now stands as a banner of courage. She was not perfect. She stumbled, dropped plates, tripped over umbrellas, but that imperfection made her victory over fear all the more profound. To see Tonks is to see someone who laughed in the face of darkness, who carried the weight of love and loss with equal determination. When the Great Hall filled with the dead after Voldemort's defeat, Tonks lay among heroes like Fred Weasley and Remus Lupin. Her story might not be told as loudly as theirs, but in every way it was just as significant. She represented the countless unnamed young lives lost in war, the ones whose potential was never fully realized, and yet she had given enough. Her short life had been full, her sacrifice total, and her memory eternal in the sun she left behind and in the hearts of readers who, once they pause to consider her, will never forget the witch with the ever-changing hair, who gave everything she had. Number 24. A half-blood against prejudice. Of all the characters who walked through the storm of the Second Wizarding War, few carried the contradictions of heritage and destiny as much as Nymphadora Tonks. Her life was shaped not by a noble crest or the echo of an ancient family name, but by the tension between two worlds. Her father, Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born, lived with quiet resilience in a society that branded him unworthy of the magical gift he was born with. Her mother, Andromeda Black, was a daughter of one of the oldest pure-blood families in Britain, yet she was cast out after marrying for love. From this union came Tonks, whose very existence stood as defiance against the dogma of blood purity. For the likes of Bellatrix Lestrange, her mother's sister Tonks, was an embarrassment, a reminder that the so-called noble house of Black could fracture under the weight of its own arrogance. But for Tonks herself, being a half-blood was never a curse. It was a badge of freedom she carried with laughter, courage, and colour-changing hair. Her birthright was a paradox. According to the strict bloodlines that families like the Malfoys and Blacks clung to, she was neither wholly welcome in the elitist circles of pure-blood society, nor embraced as one of the so-called outcasts. Yet the irony was sharp. The Black family, obsessed with purity, produced some of the fiercest opponents of that very ideology. Sirius Black, her cousin, rebelled with fire and fury. Andromeda chose love over tyranny. Tonks followed that same line of rebellion, but her weapon was not only defiance, it was service. By becoming an auror under Mad-Eye Moody's training, she broke into a profession that demanded discipline, intelligence, and bravery. No snob could dismiss her as weak or incapable. She did not simply reject the rules of blood purity, she dismantled them by thriving where her so-called betters could not. The path she walked was not one of ease. The wizarding world in the 1990s was still deeply scarred by the ideology of Lord Voldemort, whose rhetoric of blood supremacy had spread like poison. Even within the Ministry of Magic, whispers of heritage still mattered, and prejudice lingered in subtle ways. For a young woman whose hair could turn bubblegum pink at will, Tonks was doubly conspicuous. She was a Metamorphmagus and a half-blood. In one scene in Order of the Phoenix, J.K. Rowling describes her stumbling into the kitchen of number 12, Grimmauld Place, cheerful and awkward, spilling things and knocking over chairs, earning a laugh from Harry and his friends. But beneath that clumsy exterior lay a truth. She had earned her place as an auror in a world that measured worth by pedigree. The fact that she could serve as a defender of the magical community when so many with pure blood fell into cowardice or cruelty was its own powerful statement. Her family's story became a battlefield of values. Bellatrix Lestrange, a fanatic for blood purity, saw Tonks as a living insult. Narcissa Malfoy, another aunt, chose power and security in the arms of wealth. But Andromeda stood apart, raising her daughter to see worth in humanity, not lineage. This difference surfaces subtly in the books. When Harry visits Tonks's parents after Dobby's death in Deathly Hallows, he sees Andromeda as a pale, beautiful woman with a strong resemblance to Bellatrix, though her eyes carry kindness instead of malice. That contrast is everything. In those moments, we see that Tonks inherited the courage of her mother's rebellion rather than the cruelty of her aunt's loyalty. In every action she took against Voldemort's forces, she was also fighting the ghosts of her family's ideology. The prejudice she faced was not always open, but it was cutting. In The Half-Blood Prince, Remus Lupin resists Tonks's love, claiming that she deserves someone younger, unburdened, and not cursed with lycanthropy. Beneath his excuses lies a mirror of society's fear that certain bloodlines and conditions marked people as unworthy. Tonks, with unwavering determination, stood against it. Her love for Lupin was the clearest rejection of such bigotry. She did not see his curse as a stain, but as a part of the man she cherished. Rowling writes, "She's chosen you, and that's that." Through this choice, Tonks extended the defiance of her parents. If Andromeda had married a Muggle-born in defiance of her family, Tonks married a werewolf in defiance of a society that judged harshly. Her role in the Order of the Phoenix was more than symbolic. She was present in the missions that risked everything, from escorting Harry Potter to Grimmauld Place to the battle at the Department of Mysteries. When Harry later mourns the losses of that battle, Tonks is among those injured, standing shoulder to shoulder with Sirius, Moody, and Kingsley. Her very presence in those struggles shattered the illusion that noble blood produced noble deeds. Bellatrix, Draco, and other pure bloods of renown fought for tyranny, while Tonks, branded a half-blood, fought for freedom. It was living proof that morality and valor had nothing to do with ancestry. One of the most telling aspects of her character is her humor. Where others carried their burdens with solemnity, Tonks laughed at hers. She joked about her clumsiness, she teased Harry about his scar, and she turned her hair shocking colors to lighten the mood of grim surroundings. In Order of the Phoenix, she turns her nose into that of a pig to make Ginny laugh. This ability to meet prejudice with playfulness was her greatest weapon. To sneers about her heritage, her response was not bitterness but irreverence. Where blood purists wanted fear, she gave them mockery. In her refusal to be defined by others' standards, she became more powerful than they could imagine. Her very name carried meaning. Nymphadora, a name she loathed, tied her to her mother's noble family. But Tonks, the name she demanded everyone use, erased the pretension. It was short, sharp, and unpretentious. In that choice, she stripped herself of unnecessary grandeur and carved out her own identity. The act of rejecting her given name paralleled her rejection of the hierarchy that judged her blood. She chose to define herself, not by the traditions of the Black family, but by the life she lived among friends and fighters. Her story becomes even more compelling when contrasted with her cousin, Draco Malfoy. He embodied the pressures of blood purity, raised to believe in the supremacy of his name, yet tortured by the responsibilities it forced upon him. Tonks, on the other hand, grew up in a household that rejected those lies, and she flourished. In Draco, we see the crushing weight of bigotry. In Tonks, we see the liberation that comes when one laughs at it. The two branches of the Black family stand as mirrors, one consumed by obsession with blood, the other freed by the choice to abandon it. In the end, her sacrifice sealed the defiance she carried her whole life. She fell in the Battle of Hogwarts beside Remus Lupin, leaving behind their infant son, Teddy. In her death, she joined the ranks of those who gave everything so that the next generation could live without fear. Teddy Lupin, like his mother, was a child of paradox, a half-blood, half-orphan, and Metamorphmagus. But unlike his mother, he grew up in a world that Voldemort had failed to conquer. Tonks's defiance was not only for herself, but for him, for Harry, and for every child born into a society where worth could never again be measured by blood alone. It is telling that when Harry meets Teddy, he is reminded of Tonks's ability to change her hair at will. The trait is not merely magical, it is symbolic. Just as she could alter her appearance, she could also reshape the destiny that others would have written for her. Her life was proof that no pedigree can dictate a person's worth, and her legacy is that the future belongs to those who choose love over hate, defiance over submission, and laughter over fear. Even her critics could not erase her impact. Bellatrix may have mocked her bloodline, calling her a disgrace to the family, but Bellatrix herself died clinging to Voldemort's lost cause. Tonks died fighting for freedom. The scoreboard of history speaks louder than any insult. The so-called half-blood left behind a legacy of bravery, while the pure-blood fanatic left only ruin. Rowling's deliberate contrast between these women was no accident. It was a reminder that bloodlines are illusions. Actions are what endure. For readers, Tonks is often remembered for her humour, her bright hair, or her romance with Lupin. But beneath those details lies a truth that deserves attention. She was a half-blood who lived without shame. She turned the very label meant to demean her into a source of strength. In a society obsessed with categorization, she stood unclassifiable, an auror, a wife, a mother, a warrior. The legacy of Nymphadora Tonks is the reminder that courage is not inherited. It is chosen, and it is proven again and again in the face of prejudice. In the grand mosaic of the Harry Potter world, her story is one thread among many, yet it is one of the most subversive. While Voldemort and his followers clung to their myths of superiority, Tonks embodied the opposite, the messy, clumsy, colourful truth that people are more than their blood. Her example is a rebuke to every whisper of bigotry, and her life, though cut short, remains a lesson in what it means to laugh in the face of hatred and live boldly, not by speeches, but by deeds. Number 25. Patrols around Hogsmeade and Hogwarts. Under the shadow of dark times, when Voldemort's influence crept across every corner of wizarding Britain, Nymphadora Tonks played a role that rarely makes it into the spotlight. While most readers remember her for her clumsiness, her bright hair that shifted with her mood, or her tragic romance with Remus Lupin, there was another side of her story that unfolded quietly in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. It was the side where she patrolled the lonely paths between Hogsmeade and Hogwarts, standing guard in the cold, often alone, her wand ready and her eyes constantly alert for signs of danger. This was not the glamorous heroism of duels or dramatic rescues. It was the slow, exhausting vigilance of a soldier who understood that holding the line was sometimes the bravest thing one could do. Hogwarts, once thought of as an unbreachable fortress, was no longer as secure as it had been in Dumbledore's prime. The walls themselves might have been thick and the enchantments ancient, but the times had changed. Death Eaters had managed to infiltrate and corrupt before, and the headmaster himself knew that the castle stood vulnerable to plots that could bypass brute force. Tonks, an auror under Mad-Eye Moody's training, was one of those charged with keeping the perimeter safe. She worked shifts in Hogsmeade, at the gates, and along the winding paths where students sometimes wandered. Rowling's text hints at this duty when Harry sees her in the corridors and notices how weary and diminished she looks. The war was taking its toll on her, but she carried on, knowing that her work, though unseen, meant safety for the children inside. A specific moment comes in The Half-Blood Prince when Harry, Ron, and Hermione travel back from Christmas at the Burrow. The train halts and they must walk back to the castle through the snowy night. It is Tonks who meets them and escorts them up to the gates. The book tells us they found Tonks waiting for them, her hair a mousy brown, her face pale and drawn, but she walked beside them, wand in hand, eyes sweeping the darkness. This is not the playful Tonks of Order of the Phoenix. Here she appears subdued, weighed down by grief and responsibility, yet her presence is proof of the invisible shield she was helping to maintain. Without her, those paths were vulnerable, and danger lurked not far away. In the wizarding world, vigilance often took the form of protective enchantments. Tonks specialized in charms and defensive magic, skills she had honed at the auror office. During her patrols, she cast Homenum Revelio to detect hidden presences, strengthened Repello Inimicum barriers, and checked for concealed passageways that might allow intruders in. It was thankless work. Students would sometimes notice faint flickers of magic across the boundaries of the school grounds, not realizing it was the result of Tonks and others layering protective spells like overlapping shields. What appeared as nothing more than mist on a cold evening was, in truth, her careful watch. It is worth noting that Tonks was not alone in this effort. Teachers like Professor Flitwick, with his expertise in charms, often worked alongside her, reinforcing wards or closing secret entrances. Aurors such as Kingsley Shacklebolt rotated through the same duties, but Tonks spent the most time at Hogsmeade. Her connection to the Order of the Phoenix gave her both the responsibility and the determination to do what was necessary. She was trusted not only by the Ministry, but also by Dumbledore himself, who understood that quiet work in the shadows was just as important as open defiance in the field. The irony of Tonks's patrols lies in the way students misinterpreted her presence. Harry himself, during the year, noticed her melancholy state and thought it was due to grief for Sirius Black. While that was true in part, it obscured the larger picture. Her long hours on guard, her loneliness, and her constant exposure to the threat of Death Eater ambushes wore her down physically and emotionally. In one of the darker passages, Rowling writes, Tonks looked thinner, paler than Harry remembered. Her hair had lost its bright sheen. There was something broken in her, as though she carried a weight unseen. That weight was not only personal sorrow, but the relentless burden of her nightly duties. Students never saw the moments when she quietly apprehended suspicious figures near the Hog's Head, or when she spent hours tracing old smugglers' tunnels from Honeyduke's basement to ensure they were sealed against infiltration. These scenes never made it onto the page, but the implications are clear from Dumbledore's heightened security measures. Tonks was assigned to the dirty work, the checking, the patrolling, the constant suspicion. Her life at that point was not defined by heroic clashes, but by the endurance of long, watchful nights. That, in itself, was a form of courage too often overlooked. The danger of Hogsmeade was real. Death Eaters had already proven they could infiltrate the village, and many of its shopkeepers lived in quiet fear. Zonko's joke shop had closed, Madame Rosmerta was under the imperious curse, and the normally cheerful atmosphere of the village had turned tense. Every shadow seemed like a threat, every stranger a possible spy. In such a climate, Tonks's job was not only magical defense but also reassurance. Her visible presence told villagers and students alike that someone was watching, that the Order had not abandoned them. Though her smile had faded, her duty itself became a source of comfort to those who noticed. There is another telling moment when Harry returns to Hogwarts after Dumbledore's death. At that point, Tonks is again present on the grounds, standing among other members of the Order who had worked tirelessly to defend what remained. Her grief, doubled by Lupin's distance and the collapse of safety at the castle, was profound. Yet the roots of that grief trace back to the long months she spent patrolling when she bore witness to the gradual erosion of Hogwarts' sense of security. She saw the danger growing day by day, and though she could not stop it, she did everything within her power to slow its advance. Tonks's patrol work also reveals something about her character that is not always obvious. For a Metamorphmagus known for her flamboyance, she accepted a role that demanded invisibility and restraint. She toned down her appearance, hiding her natural gift so as not to draw attention. That alone speaks volumes about her adaptability and discipline. It was not about her anymore, it was about the collective safety of others. Her brown hair and tired face in Half-Blood Prince were not just reflections of heartbreak, but deliberate choices that allowed her to fade into the background while she worked. Even the geography of her duties carries meaning. The path from Hogsmeade to Hogwarts was symbolic. It was the artery connecting the outside world to the last stronghold of magical education. To guard that artery was to hold the line between chaos and fragile peace. The students who trekked that road after weekends in the village likely never knew how closely Tonks or others were watching, how many layers of magic and vigilance stood between them and awaiting ambush. This quiet guardianship preserved a sense of normalcy, even as war loomed. Looking back, Tonks's unseen labor mirrors the larger theme of Half-Blood Prince. The year was full of secrets, hidden battles, and sacrifices that took place out of sight. Just as Harry wrestled with lessons in the pensive, uncovering hidden truths about Voldemort's past, Tonks waged her own unseen struggle to protect the present. The novel is filled with hints that everything at Hogwarts was under strain, and her quiet patrols underscore the fact that the school was already under siege long before the final battle came. The lack of recognition for her work also highlights the often ignored side of war. Heroic moments are remembered, but the endless watchfulness, the guarding, and the small actions that prevent disaster are overlooked. Tonks belongs to that class of guardians whose names might be footnotes in history, but whose contributions kept the line from collapsing. Every night she walked the frosted roads. Every time she swept her wand across a hidden path, she was buying time for the rest of the wizarding world to prepare. Even in fan discussions, Tonks's role during Half-Blood Prince is often reduced to her personal struggles or her love story with Lupin. Yet beneath that surface lies the reality of a young auror who bore the weight of daily defense. She was a soldier without glory, one who defended not through dramatic duels but through persistence and resolve. The faint glow of her wand in the night symbolized the fragile but enduring light that held back the darkness, if only for a little while. And that perhaps is the truest measure of her courage. Number 26. When magic falters from grief. Of all the characters who weave in and out of the pages of J.K. Rowling's saga, few carry the same quiet weight of tragedy as Nymphadora Tonks. Her story is often remembered for its flashes of humor, her clumsy energy, and her cheerful pink hair. Yet hidden within the sixth book, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, lies a little-known detail that reveals just how deeply magic and emotion are intertwined in the wizarding world. Tonks, a Metamorphmagus, is supposed to wield her powers effortlessly. From birth, she had been able to shift her face and change her hair as easily as breathing, but when grief and heartbreak enter her life, that effortless talent falters. Her magic dulls, and with it, the very brightness of her identity seems to dim. The first hints of this decline come when Harry notices that Tonks looks different, subdued, as though the colours have been drained from her. Instead of the vibrant pink spikes of hair that once radiated her playful spirit, her appearance becomes muted, flat, and weary. Rowling writes, Tonks's hair had turned a mousy brown, and her face looked drawn. This change is not just cosmetic, it symbolizes a deeper erosion of self. For a Metamorphmagus, appearance is not a mask, but a reflection of the soul's rhythm. Tonks's inability to sustain her vibrant look reveals how loss and longing can cut straight through magical gifts that once seemed untouchable. Her Patronus offers another striking example. In the earlier books, Tonks's Patronus had taken the form of a playful and powerful animal, though it was never specified at first. But by the 6th book, when her grief over Remus Lupin consumes her, her Patronus weakens and transforms. The once strong projection of her inner light becomes a weaker, altered version, signaling a profound shift inside her. Rowling makes this moment deeply personal when Harry observes the change and notes how unusual it is. As Dumbledore explains to him, the Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. For Tonks, hope has collapsed, and so the Patronus itself falters. This is one of the rare cases in the series where emotions not only affect spellcasting, but also alter a character's unique magical biology. Ordinary witches and wizards may cast charms less effectively when distracted or upset, but Tonks's entire magical essence, the very thing that makes her a Metamorphmagus, is bound to her state of mind. As her heart aches, her gift weakens, and the colourful ease of transformation slips from her grasp. It is a reminder that magic in Rowling's world is not separate from humanity, but rather an extension of it. Just as Harry struggles to summon a Patronus when overwhelmed by fear, Tonks cannot summon her hair's vibrant colours when consumed by grief. Readers who pay attention to Tonks's storyline in Half-Blood Prince find themselves face to face with the human cost of the war. Tonks is not dueling Death Eaters in these passages, nor is she unravelling mysteries about Horcruxes. Instead, she is silently carrying a personal battle within herself, one that bleeds into her magic. When her Patronus changes to reflect her feelings for Lupin, becoming a wolf, her vulnerability is laid bare. This is not simply a romantic gesture, but a dangerous weakening, because the Patronus is no longer drawn from a well of happiness, but from longing and sorrow. Rowling subtly shows that love, when tangled with despair, can twist even protective magic into something fragile. In one pivotal moment, Harry misinterprets Tonks's despair as grief over Sirius Black's death. The text reads, "Her Patronus has changed lately. It's her grief for Sirius." But the truth is more complex. The change in her Patronus and the dimming of her abilities stem from her love for Remus, who, racked with guilt over their age difference and his lycanthropy, pushes her away. This rejection crushes her spirit. Lupin's self-denial casts a shadow over her, and though her love remains strong, the absence of hope corrodes her abilities. It is a subtle but devastating example of how magic mirrors the most private struggles of the heart. Rowling rarely presents magic as flawless or invulnerable. Instead, she suggests that wizards and witches are deeply tied to their emotions, their fears, and their hopes. In Tonks's case, her faltering abilities reflect a universal truth. Grief steals vitality. Her once flamboyant pink hair becomes mousy brown, not because she chooses it, but because she cannot summon the emotional spark that fuels her transformations. For a reader, this moment is as striking as any duel. It is a quiet unravelling, a reminder that even the most gifted can be undone by sorrow. Tonks's struggles highlight another crucial theme. Identity in the wizarding world is never fixed. For her, identity had always been playful and flexible. She could reinvent herself at will. Yet grief exposes a different side of identity, the side that is shaped not by choice, but by what life takes away. When her inner joy is lost, her hair refuses to cooperate, and her entire presence seems diminished. The magic of a Metamorphmagus, once a symbol of freedom, becomes a mirror of captivity to sadness. Her eventual recovery is just as telling. When Lupin finally accepts her love, allowing himself to believe he deserves it, hope returns to her life. With that return, her magic flourishes once more. The Patronus regains strength, her hair brightens, and her identity blossoms again. This transformation is not just about romance, it is about how hope repairs the very core of magical ability. Just as despair weakened her, love and acceptance breathe life back into her gifts. This narrative thread underscores Rowling's larger message: emotions are the heartbeat of magic, and without them, even the strongest powers fade. For Tonks, this journey carries tragic irony. Though she regains her strength, it comes in the shadow of war and sacrifice. Her renewed power does not save her from her eventual fate at the Battle of Hogwarts, but it does remind the reader that healing is possible, even in the darkest moments. By showing her abilities falter and then recover, Rowling makes her a deeply human figure whose magic reflects the cycles of despair and hope that define all lives. Scenes of Tonks's weakness also serve as a narrative counterbalance to Harry himself. Harry often struggles with his emotions clouding his magic. His failures at occlumency are a prime example. But where Harry's battles are loud and filled with confrontation, Tonks's are quiet, subtle, and personal. They take place in the silence of grief, in the way her Patronus weakens or her hair dulls. This quiet suffering makes her story resonate differently, showing that not all battles in the wizarding world are fought with wands raised. Some are fought in the soul, with magic fading at the edges. Rowling's decision to embed this detail in the 6th book also enriches the atmosphere of Half-Blood Prince, a novel drenched in themes of loss, uncertainty, and decay. Hogwarts itself feels less safe, the students are more anxious, and the shadow of Voldemort stretches across every chapter. In this environment, Tonks's dimming powers are not an isolated incident, but part of a wider tapestry of despair. Her struggle becomes a symbol of how the rising darkness erodes the light in all who resist it. What makes Tonks's case unique in the canon is the biological nature of her gift. A Metamorphmagus is not casting spells, but living in a constant state of magical fluidity. For such a gift to falter under emotional strain shows that magic is not an abstract force, but a deeply embodied one. Just as depression in the Muggle world can sap energy, appetite, and willpower, despair in the wizarding world literally reshapes the magical body. Tonks becomes the clearest case study of this phenomenon, reminding readers that the border between the psychological and the magical is thin,